Okay, hey everyone. Welcome to our final week together, which is really exciting. I hope that you're doing okay out there. Thank you all for your work this semester, this term. I really appreciated seeing your work, getting to know you as you move through things, and just the quality of your work overall has been really strong. Again and again, I've been able to write comments like, "Hey, you're meeting all expectations of this assignment," and that's not always the case. So. Just thank you for your work this term, for the quality of that work again, and just your effort here as we work to close down the term. Now, in this Module 8 overview, I'm going to give you some advice, point you to some resources that I think will be really helpful for you if you haven't already started to look at them, and then also clarify some things related to how these group collaborative writing assignments will be scored and how, at the end of the day, your individual work will be acknowledged and will support or detract from the final grade in the final assignments themselves. So to share my screen with you all, and actually let me view this as a student, so that way you don't see weird stuff that's confusing. Uh, we have a few major assignments to close out the term. The team project final, the team presentation final, and then the team minutes and evaluation. So in total, that's 350 points, roughly 35% of your grade there. And then we have, of course, a short reading quiz that's worth 10 points. But let's look at the let's keep our attention here on these major assignments to avoid this getting too long. Now, of course, you want to look through the learning goals for the module to help frame the work that you're doing this week. There's this checklist that's going to help you work to budget your time, hopefully. And you can see here that this week and the final week you end up spending more than 6 total hours on our course materials. So work to try to divide that time as best you can. And then we get into um, this quiz. And so the quiz is focused on chapters 3, 4, and 14. So going back to our learning materials, 3, 4, and 14 are your go-tos here. The graphics, things like that will help you, and the collaborative writing piece will help you as you think about some of your final writing steps if you haven't looked at those chapters just yet. But what we're all focused on, surely, is this large assignment here at the end that you have been working to collaborate with your group members about. Some of you have been having excellent experiences, some of you have been having mixed experiences, and some of you have been having terrible experiences. And that's kind of how it goes, both in class, of course, but also in the real world. And to help you think about these collaborative group projects as it affects you and your final grade in the course, I want to take this time in this overview to just show you and highlight for you that if you are doing what it is you are supposed to do, then you aren't going to be penalized for what your peer who might not be doing what they are supposed to do. Likewise, if you're nervous about the total quality of a particular piece of the presentation or particular piece of the final, you have to note that you're going to be able to share what you have done, and you'll be graded largely on what you have contributed to the work in these final assignments. So we have these long instructions. Again, with an online course, we're trying to spell out everything as much as possible. It creates a lot of text for you to move through, and I do apologize for that. But we have some really clear expectations of what the final team project should look like. And the resource that I want to highlight for you will be the student examples. So the student examples, these are examples of, full marked, either earning full points for this particular student submission. And these aren't perfect. They don't have, they're always, especially when it comes to writing, there are always ways that we can improve what's here. But regarding the expectations that are listed within the rubric, all expectations are being met and all points are being earned. So if you are struggling to think about, hey, what should this look like at the end of the day if we want to earn all the points, then don't sleep on these student examples down here. And also don't miss out on thinking about how the rubric works and how you'll be scored on this, because this is how I attempt, though it's impossible to be completely objective when it comes to writing. This is how I attempt to be as objective as possible when scoring your work. And the uh, uh, the pieces here are broken down for you related to how I'm trying to grade your work. And then at the very end, you see this, did you fulfill your role? And there are no points associated with this, but in the description it says, based on the information within our final team minutes and evaluation assignment, the final grade of this assignment will be adjusted up or down, depending on your involvement and contributions toward producing this submission. So we know that we all need to submit individual copies of the team project finals within these submission spaces. But we also know that here at the end, we have a team minutes and evaluation assignment that asks you to fill out a template and an evaluation piece that will work to break down what you were doing, what your teammates were doing, and regarding and this is something that's only for my eyes to see, and I get to kind of read through emails that I've received, consider the individual's work within the group setting, and either adjust up for example, if a final is submitted that is clearly missing parts, and so therefore it's scoring less than what it should within the rubric, but you as an individual did what you were supposed to do, the tasks delegated to you within the final project are well done, etc. It allows me to go back into that assignment and to improve your grade. Likewise, if you're someone who hasn't been available, if you're someone who hasn't completed delegated tasks, if you're someone who has produced poor work, then that has needed to be revised or pushed forward by your classmates, then this in turn also allows me to remove some points, remove some credit that you should not have earned based on your total team involvement with this final collaborative document and presentation. So it's important for you to fill this out, to be honest with your observations, so that way I can consider that in adjusting final scores. Likewise, this comes through within our team presentation. So did you fulfill your role in adapting your final into this presentation piece? And what I want to say here quickly about the final presentation is that you want to consider that the audience for this is shifting a little bit for the presentation. Your goal, right, is to adapt technical content for a non-expert, non-specialist audience. So we're thinking of audience members who are outside of the general scope, who aren't primary audience members of what it is your team has produced for the final, but are more secondary or tertiary audience members. How are you adjusting the content in your writing to meet that audience? This was something that was missed a bit in some of the presentation work that was completed a little earlier in the term. Some of you missed out on that audience adjustment need. And I think part of that is because I didn't do a good enough job of explicitly highlighting this shift in audience. So to stop sharing and come back to all of you here, uh, you know, for those of you who are having really positive and strong group experiences, um, you should hopefully be able to sympathize with some of your classmates who aren't. And when it comes to group work within the professional world or within a class setting, um, you will have a mixed experience. I can highlight in my role here as an assistant faculty lead with Ivy Online English at the college and a professor of English at the college. I've worked in many groups, many teams. I have been a lead member. I have been a contributing member. I don't think I've ever actually been a member who didn't show up to do things. There will be some of those who won't have anything to submit and will earn zeros on these final assignments. Um, but at the end of the day, it's important for all of us to think about, okay, what is my responsibility? What is my role within the group? And to successfully push forward in meeting whatever task has been delegated to us to the best of our ability and holding up our end of the bargain for our team, knowing that we are going to need to rely on others and they may or may not hold up their bargain. Now, in real life, that might affect you in different ways, in different team settings, and you might need to have conversations with supervisors or et cetera, or with patients or with, inspectors, related to what's happening within your professional world. Here in the academic world, your communication with me to highlight any concerns connecting with folks or things like that help me to begin to form a picture of where you are and where the group has been. And then lastly, that final, reflective piece, the team member evaluation piece, will allow me to make some adjustments as necessary so you aren't penalized like you might be in the professional world, for example. At least here in the academic world, I can adjust scores so that way, for those of you who are doing what you're supposed to do and you're doing it at a high level, aren't, seeing a negative effect on your final grade. If you have any questions for me, don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. Uh, Otherwise, keep working hard, keep pushing forward. Again, I'm just really thankful for all the work that you've done this semester. And you're pushing forward in the summer, and that's great. The final due date for all of this work is Saturday, August 1st, which is the last day of the term. I must submit final grades by Tuesday, August 4th. So I have to really move through your final and your presentations pretty quickly. And that's why I really lean on the rubric to try as objectively as possible. Click, are they meeting these expectations for the assignment or not? And then what do I need to adjust based on these final group dynamic notes and who should be receiving credit, who shouldn't be receiving as much credit, or who should be receiving more credit based on what they have done. Okay, that's it for now. Again, thanks so much for spending time with me. Thanks for watching this final module overview, and best of luck as you move forward and complete these final assignments. Take care, everybody.